A country's ecological footprint, according to the World Wildlife Fund (WWF), is determined by its population, the amount consumed by its average resident, and the resource intensity used in providing the goods and services consumed. In the WWF's 2006 Living Planet report, the two North American nations have the second and fourth heaviest ecological footprints per person. For them, the so-called Green Revolution in Cuba is nothing less than a miracle. Cuba is the only country in the same report that comes close to the targets for sustainable living and development. It has, in fact, achieved many of the ideals its northern neighbors are only beginning to aspire to. It was during the Cuban economic crisis in the early 1990s that the country came to grow over 80% of the fresh produce it consumes. Out of necessity, farmers devised ways to save energy and chemicals, and the state started to provide them generous support. This is how Cuba has become a world leader in community-based agriculture, urban farming, and organic food production, though it is also true that the society still lacks many other basic comforts. B. The keeping of animals as objects for people to gaze at has a long history. Since at least 2000 BC, in many civilizations such as Egypt, China, Persia, and Rome, the very rich and powerful have collected animals from all over the world as a demonstration of their status and wealth. The animals, often from Africa, were kept in cages or allowed to wander in the pleasure gardens constructed by the upper classes, and they would be used sometimes for hunting, but mostly for the amusement of their owners and their guests. The practice of keeping such unusual animals continued into the later centuries, as was the case with the rulers of England, who kept lions, tigers, and other similar animals in the castle of the Tower of London. Each evening, smaller animals would be pushed into the cages to be devoured, all watched by guests of the king. The major change in the collecting of animals occurred in the 19th century, with the opening of zoological gardens, or zoos as they have come to be known. The opening up of the spectacle of exotic animals to the urban public was closely tied to two major developments in the 19th century. In the capital cities of the great modern empires, Paris, London, Berlin, zoos were opened in which the metropolitan population could see at close quarters a range of wild animals similar in extent to the range of territories coming under imperial control. Similarly, the new zoos, in Europe and in the United States, promoted an ideology of scientific modernism. They functioned not only to provide spectacle to the masses, but to educate, and to assist in the scientific investigation and analysis of the living world. C. Richard Wright, the famous African-American novelist, was born in Mississippi. His family lived in conditions of great hardship and poverty, and Wright grew up, first of all without a father, who had left the family when he was very young, and then even without the care and protection of his mother, who fell seriously ill while he was still a young boy. Wright left Mississippi, like many other African Americans, and headed north for Chicago, when he was about 18 years old. He got work in the post office, and found he could afford to eat properly at last. He also began to develop as a writer, becoming involved in left-wing writers' groups, and writing his first novel, Cesspool, which described his own life working in the post office. However, the novel failed to attract interest, and remained, at the time, unpublished. Wright had also by now begun to write short stories, and his first collection, Uncle Tom's Children, was published in 1938. Although this book was a success, Wright was unhappy with its reception. He felt that he had been too soft and sentimental. I found that I had written a book which even bankers' daughters could read and weep over and feel good about, he said. For his next book, Wright was determined to give his readers something more than sentimentality over the conditions of black people. Native Son, a novel which was to be published in 1940, describes the crimes and punishment of a poor black man from Chicago, named Bigger Thomas. Driven to brutal killing and crimes against rich whites, Bigger Thomas is caught and executed, but he does not feel sorry. Rather, he feels that his terrible actions have given him a vitality and sense of purpose in an otherwise meaningless and poverty-stricken life. As the critic and writer Irving Howe commented later, the day Native Son appeared, American culture was changed forever. Wright, at the age of 31, had produced a great African American work of literature, but a work which foresaw the terrible consequences for American society of the racial divide and oppression of African Americans. At the time of the publication of Native Son, black people in America were still regarded as inferior to whites. In movies and on radio shows they featured as servants, as comic figures, as entertainers for their white superiors. When Wright's novel appeared, the big commercial hit movie was Gone with the Wind, an unashamedly nostalgic story of the Old South, of the days of slavery and the Civil War which had seen that society disappear. Among the many awards the movie received, an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress was given to Hattie McDaniel, the first African American to win an Academy Award, for her role as Mammy, the servant to the film's heroine, Scarlett O'Hara. Though this award was seen, sentimentally, by many white Americans as an indication of a new relationship between black and white, McDaniel, a very successful and well-paid movie actor, still faced discrimination and prejudice. Some white inhabitants in her expensive Los Angeles neighborhood attempted to keep the area for whites only, and on the night of the Oscars ceremony itself, McDaniel was made to sit at a table close to the kitchen, separate from the white movie stars. After Native Son, the rage and pride of African Americans became increasingly noticeable to the rest of America, and Wright's contribution to the emergence of the movements which demanded equality and justice can hardly be underestimated.